Harassment is ultimately contrary to law if the ordinary person in the street would regard the behaviour of the alleged harasser as amounting to harassment. So it is a common sense test, but it's imposed upon which has got to be a course of behaviour. So there've got to be at least 2 occasions of harassment to ground a criminal offence.
2 is not very much, is it? I mean, that's it seems like a very kind of low starting point.
Well, this is the worrying thing, because it's meant to be what we call a low threshold offence. And I remember David McLean, when he introduced the legislation into the House of Commons, used those words. Now, that's good in some ways if you're a victim, but it's not very good if defendants in a democratic society are being convicted of criminal offences which could affect their own careers forever on a low threshold. And that is a worrying aspect. But having said that, if a victim skillfully uses this law in a just and proper way, then it does help deal with the whole issue of proof, which can be very difficult in a harassment case.
I mean, in theory, obviously, as you say, they've got to prove this, but in theory, could a woman who is just very annoyed with her ex-lover who's called her a couple of times, in theory, could he actually end up in trouble because of that?
Yeah, he could. I mean, the other issue, of course, we've had recently is that the woman who actually made a false allegation of rape against her colleague at work. And false allegations...
Sorry.
Imogen! Come in, darling.
Your arrival was announced a long time ago. Okay, I'll stop because 2 examples of harassment does seem, a very low threshold. I mean, in theory, does it mean that a woman could take a man to court, an ex-lover, who's just, called her a couple of times after the end of an affair?
Well, that's the difficult thing, that we do get, and we see a lot of allegations which are improper and are groundless and are malicious. And we've just had an example, obviously, this week of the woman who falsely accused her colleague at work of rape. And of course, he went through the courts and he got a large sum of damages against her. And we have had lots of examples of women who have made improper allegations, and therefore, of course, the whole issue in harassment cases is the burden of proof. And it's very important that the evidence is critically looked at and that cases are properly proven in accordance with proper legal principles.
How is the coughing in the dog?
The dog.
Started moving.
That's why I want you to...
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so you
That
just
can
want
start
to...
loans
Yeah.
and stuff, yeah.
Okay.
The difficulty is that we are getting cases in court now where the allegations are often malicious and fictitious. And the real issue that we've got to face as lawyers practicing harassment law is to marshal our evidence properly and make sure that cases are properly proven in accordance with normal principles of burdens of proof and in accordance with the evidence in the traditional way. It's really vital that we do that.
Why? Yeah. Can you hear that?
I can not enough to distract.
Okay.
But any rustling it really comes through. It's such a
that's
sensitive mic, unfortunately.
it's a very sensitive microphone. That would be great because we can hear that chair.
Yeah, it's the chair that's...
Lean back in the chair now.
Well, I'm not listening to what you're saying because I keep asking you things again, but you know why I'm doing that. I'm not sort of sitting here with my ears switched off. Okay, why is it that the restraining bill is not becoming law?
Well, it was introduced in the House of Commons, I think May of last year, just before the end of the parliamentary session, and it failed to get its second reading because there was insufficient parliamentary time. And I also think the government stated they would consider bringing in some form of government legislation, because the bill is a private member's bill introduced by Bridget Prentice, the MP for Lewisham. So I'm hoping that it will get government time, but I think it is worrying that the government seems to have so little time at the moment to bring in legislation of what I call a primary nature. I think it's vital that women, for instance, are protected against infatuated behaviour, and I think it's disappointing that so much legislation at the moment is what I call on fringe areas, even though those areas are very important. And I understand that people have very, very deep views about foxes and mink and about homosexual behaviour, and those are all really important issues that need to be addressed. I think it's disappointing that an issue like the Restraining Order Bill, which is so fundamental in our society and is so important for women and to protect them against infatuated behaviour, is not getting the government time that it really deserves and it needs, and it should be central to issues in our society.
On a personal note, when would you, if you were the subject of some kind of harassment, at what point would you call in the police?
Well,
Actually, sorry. Should we say harassment or stalking if you were being stalked?
really,
Because I'm wondering whether people are going to start getting a bit confused.
well, I think that
It's a
good.
confusing issue anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, alright. If you were...
You could just call it unwanted attention.
Yeah. Okay, if you were the subject of this kind of unwanted attention, at what stage would you call in the police?
Well, I'd certainly begin to call in the police when I'd identified that I was being harassed or stalked. Now, often it won't be clear to someone that they are until some way down the line, and there'll be a triggering incident which will then enable them to recollect that various incidents that have happened over the last few weeks or months are in fact part of a course of behaviour that's being directed against them. And I think when they recognise that, then they've got to write down and document that course of behaviour. And then, if it's then repeated, they've got to seriously start thinking about getting professional help, either from a police officer or from a lawyer.
Are there any instances that you can think of, this defining moment? Can you think of any particularly dramatic examples of this defining moment?
Well, I can probably think of some in bullying at work. Bullying at work is a serious issue, and I think that if you're dealing with a person who's fairly robust at work, they might not recognise for some time that they are in fact being bullied and intimidated. And there'll come a time when they'll sit down and they'll realise that they actually are being the subject of a campaign of bullying, which can be disguised, carefully disguised and carefully concerted. And it's then that they've got to start taking stock and make a stand. If they don't do that, then their lives can then lead to dismissal or to the industrial tribunal or to a complete breakdown of behaviour at work.